are a force for change for 90 years. We took Wilma Davidson's title, and then we just changed it to 90 years instead of she worked her book, which is out of print now, but was used quite a bit for resource, was up to 1995, and that's when she finished her second presidency. So we've updated it from 1996 to 2018, and we had a committee of
You're muted.
Bobbie, you just went on
Bobbie,
mute.
you went mute. Bobbie, you're mute.
There we go. How's that?
Better.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I was trying to go forward. Okay, so here's what the book looks like. We tried to keep it as similar to the historic one as possible. And the wonderful thing on the back, the swirl, the kind of swooping flag, that's an exact copy of the 1995 book. We added the League logo to it. And of course, nowadays the barcode is important, the ISBN code. But essentially, this is what it looks like if you plan to look for it. It is currently on Amazon. It costs $15. And part of that goes to the State League. So you are helping the State League if you buy a book. You just have to type in League of Women Voters of Colorado, and it will come up. We want to share some interesting insights into the LWV Colorado League, and also the 22 local leagues that exist or have existed around the state. That was one thing that Wilma was very good at. She gathered local league histories as well, and their histories are very rich with examples of how a league can make a large difference for residents in the area it covers. When each league is first formed, they are required to publish a study of their local government. These are very valuable documents, and we have the State League, for instance, has a book called Colorado, the State We're In. And it is still available. It's used for reference. It hasn't been updated for about 10 years, if I remember, because I worked on the one that is the current one. However, if the government doesn't change very much, it's still very valuable to have that. Wilma Davidson, who was a president of the State League, wrote the book in 1995 covering the events and people who led the Colorado League from 1928 to 1995. The book is a great reference, but it is now out of print. So Tony Larson, who was then president in 2019, asked me to form a committee to update the book and preserve the original text as much as was relevant. And there was a lot in the original text which had become outdated and not necessary. So our committee made some decisions about what to leave out and what to include. One of the things we did leave out is Wilma had hundreds of footnotes, and we decided that the text would read better with just flowing through without footnotes. And second, most of her footnotes were very esoteric. Mm-hmm. We published the new book in 2020, and it was to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the National League. My committee was formed. It was Jerry Cummins, Lori Young, Diane Young, Rona Shor, who's also here today and will make some comments, and myself, Bobbie Heisterkamp. The original book was in PDF, and those of you who know anything about computers know that PDF is very hard to edit, even if you have an editor. It's much better to have Microsoft Word. You have a lot more fluidity. So we had to convert it from PDF into Microsoft Word. And what's interesting as an aside is Wilma learned how to use Word. Don't forget, 1995 was the very beginning of word processing, with help from Jerry's husband, Jerry Cummins' husband, Tom Cummins, who worked in the early computer industry. So I converted the PDF to a Microsoft Word document and painstakingly corrected almost all of the optical character recognition mistakes. Now, somebody says, what in the heck is an optical character recognition mistake? Well, I'm sure there's still some in there that I didn't catch, but my committee had pretty sharp eyes. A classic example is one which showed up quite a bit, unfortunately early and often, because Phyllis was very, very prominent, was her name was Phyllis Horney, Horney. And all through the conversion, we got Phyllis Homey because the R and the N stuck together. So I had to go back through and change those manually, rather. Phyllis, for those of you who remember, served as our expert in Colorado budget planning and Tabor. She was just an amazing font of knowledge about financing. She lobbied for many years in the legislature on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Colorado. Now, I'd like to share the table of contents with you so that you will understand the scope of the book. This is the first part of the table of contents, and we kept the decades narratives, which was something that Wilma had started. So the first part, there was a preface and let women vote. The first part was pretty much her own. Pretty much, we didn't do much to change these narratives because she did a very, very good job of first summarizing the decade, sort of what the big picture was, and then going into what exactly the League had done during that decade. So those are pretty much untouched, except for a couple of little typos, which was no big deal. Below the line, below the gap there, is what we took on. Jerry did 1996 to 1999. Lori Young did 2000 to 2004. We all did about 5 years. Diane Young did 2005 to 2009. I did 2010 to 2014. And Rona, who is new to Colorado, and we'll talk about that later, did the most recent stuff because that's when she was here. It was good for her to have that. She knew she lived through that era. The second big section is about Colorado water protection projects. And some of you may be aware that during the late 90s and early 2000s, we had a whole bunch of grants that were granted to the State League. And they were clean water projects. They had different names, but they all got nice grants. And Cynthia Peterson was the manager of all these grants. She actually had a separate office in the league office. And when I was treasurer at that time, I worked with her to make sure that the grants were carefully accounted for. The first project was called the Colorado Water Protection Project, and that started in 1997, phase 1, to 1999. So it was about 2 years for each of these phases. And you can see those were substantial grants. I won't read them all to you, you can read, but about $300,000, a little more than $300,000 in each of these phases. Which came from different sources, but they allowed Cynthia to do a very thorough job. And then all during this, or toward the end of it, she started what was called the Colorado Non-Point Source Connection newsletter. And a non-point source means that the water, the place where the water gets polluted is not one place, it's all over. And if you think about it, it's more like people who live in a city and they have non-permeable concrete When some of that runs off, it goes, that's called non-point source. You can't point to one person and say you did the pollution. It's all the different sources. And that's a big topic. Aware Colorado was the last area, and AWARE stands for Addressing Water and Natural Resources Education. And she worked with governments in these grants. They were a little bit smaller, but they still were very powerful, from 2003 to 2008. And there's a very good chapter on all of these things. So you can look at that and see how the State League made a huge difference in what our water system is now. And some of our clean water projects really did keep Colorado's water clean. The next section is the history of the 22 local leagues that we have. There are more than 22, but that's what we have. And we were pleased to have many cooperating writers who helped bring their local league history up to date. Because remember, the ones in the book stopped at 1995, so they had the same 23-year gap. And I approached local leagues, and they were simply delighted that they had the opportunity. So I kept Wilma's original history, and then added, and I gave each author, the older author, the person who did the first part, and the other author credit, because that's very important. There is a chart which is very interesting on page 196, which actually shows the beginnings and end dates of all the leagues we know about. Now, not all leagues are ended, but the current ones, the ones that are still existing, are in bold. So you can look at that and see we used to be scattered all over the place. Part of it was because of transportation. And then as we got more, it was easier to go to meetings. The leagues were more consolidated, but it's fascinating history. The next section is profiles of Colorado League leaders. And these are mostly non-presidents. These are leaders who did not become presidents, because we deal with the presidents in a different section. So we edited some of the leaders that Wilma profiled and added some of our own. We added an update for Mary Hess, because she had a short profile about going to Washington and studying at the national office. And she did so much more than that. She went on and on with being our lobbyist and then some other things. And so Diane did the update for her. We also did a profile on Marge Fish, who's actually part of the audience. And she was allowed to make comments and corrections. And I think it turned out very well. And then we also, because we are so happy that Wayne Knox was a member of the state board for quite a few years, and was an incredible source of information about the legislature, since he had been almost 30 years he had been in the legislature. So when questions came up, he would kind of advise us on what to do and who to go to. Then comes the section on the presidents. We brought Wilma's list up to date, starting with the very first president, Mabel Costigan, who's quite a character. Her husband was a national senator, and she had quite a few connections. And she started the league in Colorado. And the very last president in the time period that we are dealing with was Tony Larson. There are photographs of as many presidents as we could find. This is intriguing too, to look and see the different ways that people dressed and looked and presented themselves. In fact, the book is full of fascinating historic photographs and a lot of newspaper articles. So it's fun to look through. You don't sit down and read it all at once. You look through a little section of it, and then you put a bookmark in, and the next time you look at another section. That's the fun thing. It's dip into it as needed. Then there are comments, and this is also fascinating, from past presidents, starting with Roberta Bradbury in 1970. And they wrote 1 or 2 pages of what it was like to be president of the league at that time. So you can, again, this is a historical perspective. Some of them did a great deal of work, and they talk about it. They talk about what their plans were. And we had those first group up to Wilma herself in her original book. So we didn't to touch those except to correct a few mistypes. Then we picked up from there. This was major. And we had Marilyn Shuey, all the way up to Tony Larson. And we got a pretty good participation. Everybody did what we were hoping. And we gave them the idea of what happened during your presidency, what were your challenges, what worked, etc. And so there are a lot of very interesting things to read. And I recommend that part very much. Then we're almost at the end. The Women in Colorado Politics is another section that Wilma started. She created a list of every single woman who had served in the Colorado legislature from the very beginning. And the first woman, you all know, right, got it on the tip of your tongue, was Clara Cressingham. She was a Republican, and she was elected from 1894 to 1896. And she was from Arapahoe County. She represented Arapahoe County. Now, all of you know the women in Colorado were way, way ahead of the rest of the nation. They got the vote in November of 1893. Well, they also got the privilege of serving in the legislature. And the very next November, Clara was elected. There's no question that women were ready, and they put their candidate up and they elected her. We continued through the list. I picked up in 1995 and then worked all the way from Judy Rayer, who was also a Republican, and she was elected in 2016 I picked it up from 1995, of course, and then I went all the way through to 2018. And Judy was the last one that I had, and she was elected from Fremont, Otero, and Pueblo counties. So she was from the eastern Colorado. Then we have acknowledgments, and we left Wilma Davidson's intact. We thought it was a very good one. And at the end of her acknowledgments, she said, the way I laid out this book is so that someone in the future will be able to continue the history. And we all smiled when we saw that, because we knew we were doing just what she was hoping. And then I wrote, actually the whole committee wrote acknowledgments for 2020. Our acknowledgments also contain a proclamation from Governor Jared Post, was signed on February 20th of 2020, before the pandemic. Remember, we were still meeting then. We had a wonderful birthday party that day, and Jared came and cut the birthday cake, and he congratulated the League of Women Voters on its 100th birthday. So that proclamation, I got it from the governor and shrunk it down and put it in the book. Where did we find our source materials? Well, basements, a lot of basements. Bobbie, my basement and Lori's basement were very, very productive. And it gave me a chance to clean out a lot of things that I didn't need to save, because I've been in the league since 1993, and I was saving some stuff that just wasn't relevant. But what really was great is I found almost every single vote the newsletter, and also every single convention or council booklets. Those were the things where we found a great deal of wonderful information. And then Rona did some work at the Denver Public Library, where she found some fascinating stuff, and she was able to share it with us and copy it. Another source that I really want to recognize, and this is an interesting thing to know, The University of Colorado Library Archives in Boulder, the Nolan Library, had received 45 boxes of State League history in 1990. We do not know who donated the files, but President Pat Johnson was retiring that year, and she lived in Boulder. So we think that we're suspecting that she's the one who gave these are the files from the very beginning, from 1920, 28 or 29, all the way up. And some graduate student went through them and documented them. So there's a wonderful index. So one of the things that Rona wanted to do, and I wanted to do, was the last 3 months of 1928, there were meetings in Mrs. Costigan's house. She lived in a very elegant house on Capitol Hill, and they were the ones who started the State League. And we thought, oh, if we could find those minutes, wouldn't that be great? Because that would really give us some idea of what the aspirations were and everything else. Those meetings were of a group called the Women's Citizens League of Colorado, because somebody else had taken League of Women Voters and copyrighted it. And so for the first 12 years, it was called the Women's Citizen League of Colorado. It's the same organization, but it wasn't until 1940 that the League of Women Voters name became available, because the organization that had held on to it was defunct. And so the board of the State League filed for its copyright. So it took a while, but if you see Women's Citizens League of Colorado, that's just the League of Women Voters, a different name. Again, Rona and I were lucky. We spent a day in February of 2020 before the pandemic. You remember, it was the next month. David Hayes was the archivist, and we looked and looked and looked, and we know the minutes were not there. The way that it was so well documented, there's no way they could be there. So we still want you all to look in your basements. If you have anything from the State League in your basement, see if you can find October, November, and December minutes from 1928. We would be eternally grateful. Each member of our committee brought special talents and knowledge to the project. Some were past presidents, some had been actually the office manager at the State League, that was Diane. And so we had a great amount of talent, and Rona was our constant questioner. She helped us clarify things. We just assumed everybody would know what Tabor was. Well, sorry, we took it for granted and assumed that everyone understood that term. But she had moved to Colorado from New York a few years ago. And so she would stop us and she would say, what are you talking about? And this was wonderful for getting our text and our narratives very, very exact. In other words, we had to explain everything to her, so we had to put it in the book. And I would like to turn it over to Rona now. She's going to make a few comments, and then there's a short excerpt from the book, which is absolutely incredible. I won't give it away. I'll let Rona tell you.
Okay. Hi, everyone.
Go ahead, Rona.
Thank you, Bobbie. I have to re-emphasize, and the rest of the committee is on this call, so they can certainly agree with me that we had an incredible time putting this project together. I am a lifetime member of the League. I originally joined when I lived on Long Island. I'm learning how to pronounce that, so I don't give away my New York roots. When I joined the League, among my board activities were the monthly newsletter, which was, I don't know, photo, offset, mimeographed. I headed up voter service, and one of my great fun times as voter service chair was going to the polls after they closed, or as they were closing. We were let in. We were each given a quarter, And our job was to watch the count when they opened the machines in the back and use our quarter to go to a payphone and phone in the results. You have to think this was in the 1970s, and it was a whole lot of fun. And my kids loved it. And one of the things that we wanted to mention is, well, a few things. The league has a huge impact on us as members, but it also impacts our family and very often our friends. Everybody knows about the league, but it never hurts to learn more. And from personal experience, I've had friends join the league because they heard me speaking about it. I initially joined the league when I heard 2 league board members talk about the community I lived in. And my reaction was, that's what I want to do. I want to do what those ladies do. And it's not only ladies anymore, we're not for women only. But one of the community guides that I came across had a section listing local chapters for men, which included Elks, Knights of Columbus, National Rifle Club affiliate, Square Club, and 2 Masonic lodges. No mention of the league. For women, the mentions were American Association of University Women, Daughters of the American Revolution, Women's Auxiliary of the Elks, the League of Women Voters, Order of Eastern Star, and that was from a book in 1959. And it was published by the league at that time. And I assume it's been updated, but I found this in my files. Where was I? Okay, so as head of voter service, one of the responsibilities, we didn't have an office, although it was a very big league, was to have the league phone. So back in the 70s, you have to think that we had landlines, and we would call up AT&T and say, Rona Shor is the new voter service chair, and they would charge us perhaps $10, and they would move the league phone. So I had the league phone in the den of my house, and my kids were very excited, and they loved to answer the phone and tell people why I couldn't come to the phone. But it was a wonderful feeling to be able to answer people's questions and tell them answer their questions and tell them where they should go or how they should go about going there. And also to give people a chance to learn about joining the league. And there were a whole pile of league publications on a corner table by the phone, so I had references. And one of those references was the copy of They Represent You, which used to be, now it's online, but it was a booklet and was republished after every election. And at one point, and if you've heard this story, because I love telling it, I'm sorry if you're hearing it again, but at one point I was remarrying and planning to move. And my older son, who is now a grown-up and loves the story anyway, decided that he didn't want to move. He didn't like the new school. He wasn't going to go there. If I tell you I was moving less than 2 miles away, same everything. But he was not happy. So he took out They Represent You on his little computer. God knows what it was at that time. He wrote letters to every single person in They Represent You. So during dinner one night, and I didn't know he did it, he just did it. During dinner one night, we got a phone call from the late Senator Jacob Javits' office. He was a senator from New York and a pretty famous American. And Senator Javits' office wanted to know if he could help Jeffrey with his problem. And my then husband is like freaking out. And I thought it was hilarious. And I thought, well, this is what leaguers do. And this is what we train people to do. If you have an issue, you speak up and you write to your representative. Well, Javits was our senator. So, and on top of that, that's when you learn Senator Javits never wanted to shy from good publicity, sent the story of my son's letter to Newsday, which was the Long Island newspaper at the day, and we appeared on either page 2 or 3. Jeffrey still has a copy of the letter and the framed page from the newspaper. That's when you learn that all your neighbors read the local paper. And I got a call from the principal who didn't think it was great, that he said, I don't like publicity. And, you know, it mentioned him by name. He was an incredible person, but if I tell you I saw him perhaps 20 years later, and I walked up to him and I said, Dr. Aschenbrenner, do you remember me? He said, how could I forget? And I'm like, oh my gosh. But that's a digression. I digress a lot. But in a way, that's what makes the league meaningful. And it was fun to be able to have the phone in the house and answer calls. And when my term was up, the phone moved to somebody else's den, and the work of Vote for Voter Service continued. Fortunately, Publishers Clearinghouse is located still, I think, in Port Washington, New York. In fact, we lived across the street from their headquarters. And Lou Esther Mertz, I think she's deceased, was an incredibly generous woman. If I tell you, we would just go visit her, shake hands, talk a little bit, and she covered the entire mailing costs of our voters' guides. They weren't prepared by the state or the city. It was the league who got them out, and we were more than fortunate that we had this generous donor and supporter who paid the full cost of mailing. I don't know how many copies it was. The peninsula probably had a population of 40,000. So I don't know how many households that is, but even at the price of postage back in the day, that was a pretty generous donation to League. And when I moved here, when I left the suburbs, I moved to Manhattan and rejoined the League there. I was less active because I was working full time, but as you all know or will know, League publications are invaluable, timely. They're great at reminding you to pick up the phone and call your representatives, express your views. They tell you about meetings. So to the full extent possible, I remained active, but not on the board. One of my favorite things to do annually was to go lobby for the League of Women Voters at the state capitol in Albany, New York. We're not going to discuss the current governor, but you know, back in the day, you could walk into the legislature and you know, talk to people. So that was a pretty amazing experience to encounter, and just walking around the state capitol and soaking up the history and being really proud to be a leaguer there and able to do that. So, and 7 years ago, I picked up and moved to Denver. Haven't regretted it for a minute. And I very quickly joined the Denver League of Women Voters because League has always been kind of a touchstone for me, something I enjoy and never get bored with. And one of the first people I met was Nancy Ulrich, and Nancy and I lived in the same peninsula and we're in the same league. And Nancy, I think, was mayor of one of the towns. I don't know if she's on it, could tell us. She may have been mayor of Manhasset or Plandome. I'm not sure which, but it was great to be welcomed by her and learn more about Colorado from her. So the history project is a strong example of the things we do. We study, we inform, and we have a good time. As it says at the bottom of this page, and Bobbie makes great cookies. She really does. And you know, the smell of chocolate chip cookies when you walk into somebody's house at 9:30 in the morning, it's not bad. So, let's see. I talked about men. I think
You do the excerpt now.
what about?
I put it up on the screen.
Okay.
Mm.
This is what you want me to read?
Yes, please.
Okay, I can do that. Local League members not only served on the local league board, but on the state board as well. In 1948, Dorothy Thompson represented the League of Women Voters on a 5-member Children's Code Commission appointed by Governor Nouse to consider the revision of Colorado laws affecting children. The commission was sued and members were subpoenaed. I love this story. The day Dorothy received the subpoena, she injured her back while cleaning house and had collapsed on the bed upstairs. She heard someone calling from the front door and told them to come upstairs as she couldn't move. Her subpoena was served to her in bed by a deputy sheriff. And I still get teased about living here in the Wild West. It's, you know, it's part of what's fun about the league, and it was one of the many things that we learned during this project. I want to digress for a second and say the House has just passed the bill allowing a path to citizenship for the Dreamers. So that's something that we've had speakers from Dreamers here in Colorado speak to the league, and we're really proud of these people, and it's great news, and now it's on to the Senate. So thank you all for putting up with me and enjoying Bobbie, who's much more serious than I am. But I can't tell you enough that this was really fun. You know, we don't work, we have a good time. Going to the library in Boulder was hilarious. Bobbie and I had a map, and we're both reasonably intelligent, and we could not find the library. And the students would say, oh, it's right over there. So we would go over there, and the student would say, no, it's over there. And nobody offered to take these 2 senior citizens right to the door. But we finally found it. And then we couldn't find a place to have lunch because we kept asking people, where is such and such? And they said, it was gone. But we did have lunch in a student restaurant, and we had a great day. And doing research, we also spent a little bit of time, and then COVID happened, at History Colorado, which also has great archives, but we just ran out of time and couldn't do the research there. So remember, look in your basements, tell your neighbors how great League is, and thank you.